Quigley's book is complex. Sometimes I want to illuminate certain parts and make it clearer. So I'm decided to take the charts that are in his books and illuminate them a little bit by putting them into PowerPoint slides and enhancing it a little bit by combining a couple of portions of the book. So if you remember the end of part 4, he was just going into the demographic cycle, and he was describing the 4 parts, the 4 parts of the demographic cycle. A, B, C, and D, and they're correlating. Then the 4 correlating functions of each part of the demographic cycle. And if you remember, he described, gave you a brief description of all 4. Okay, if you remember with the stage A, where what he calls the primitive or the base or the medieval portion that existed before 1700, before the 4 great revolutions, which is the most stable. We said where the birth rate is high, the death rate is high, and the numbers are stable, and most of the people are below the age of 18. And that's in the primitive society where man existed for eons. Stage B is where we get to begin to see the change, where the effect of the revolutions of the Western civilization revolutions took their effect. Okay, because of the agricultural revolution, where you can produce food to feed people, and the medical and sanitation advances, where you could preserve life to keep people from getting sick and dying. You have a high birth rate because now you can feed them, and you have the death rate falling because now you get rid of a lot of the diseases that took people's lives before they got old, and it causes the numbers to rise. The second thing is you got the age distribution of most of the people in this particular cycle are in their prime. He calls this the demographic explosion cycle. This is where the civilization really starts to expand. It really starts to reach out because it needs more land and more materials. And since most of the women are in their childbearing prime from 18 to 45, they produce more children. And since you have a lot of men that are also in their prime, they can actually go out and fight. They can bear arms, and they can go out and basically conquer and overwhelm other people and gather more land and more resources. Okay, the third demographic is what I call the restabilized, where the birth rate begins to fall because people become comfortable, and the death rate remains low. Notice that it's stable because you have a low birth rate and a low death rate, and that causes the stability. And in this age distribution, most of the people are middle-aged. They're then it was between 30 and 60, and I call this the restabilized portion. That's before it starts decaying. And when Quigley wrote the book, this is where the modern world, or the modern Western world, was. It had conquered, it was still powerful, and it was stable. In other words, it was a little bit more peaceful. This was the time after 1945, where the population pressure wasn't as high. And then then you see the other side, and I'm gonna attach a video, a link to a YouTube video about that, and it's exploring the Japanese Geriatric Society, where they're in the stage D along with Europe, but they seem to have reached it a little faster than Europe has, where the birth rate is very, very low and the death rate is high because you have a lot of seniors, you have a lot of elderly, and so then their numbers are slowly declining. And you have, like I said, you have a lot of old people and not enough young people to take care of them. And I call this the geriatric cycle, where the population has passed its peak and start to decline. This is an interesting chart because it's at the crux of following Western civilization. It's at the crux of how the core moves. We have the diffusion of the demographic cycle. How these four great revolutions, or the parts of Western civilization spread out and diffuse away from the core, and you can see how they advance through each particular cycle. And he put it like every 50 years they advance to each particular cycle, and you can see how it started in Britain, or Western Europe. How it started in Britain, and they reached the population explosion cycle first, and they dominated the world, or dominated Western civilization, and then it moved. France got it the next 50 years, and you can see they dominated. As you can see, as the parts of the civilization explode, they start to dominate, and then they slowly start to stabilize, and we can see the pattern from one to the other. After 1944, they leave out the United States, but the thing is, after 1944-45, you can see the Soviet explosion, and they along with the United States conquered Germany, and they, when he wrote it, and Quigley wrote it, the Russians and the Americans both co-owned, or both co-ruled the world, one half to the other. And this is the prediction. This is the prediction that we're talking about that may or may not come true, is the rise of Asia, because they're the last to get the parts of Western civilization, and they're the last people to actually get the what they call the population explosion, the demographic explosion. Not necessarily in China, because China had so many people and it was artificially restricted and they were already large. But India, a lot of East Asian countries like Ceylon, or Pakistan, those kind of places, they started to get this particular explosion in this particular cycle. You can also include Africa and Latin America in that. They're just now starting to gather the pieces of Western civilization and form it into something, and they're developing, and they're getting the same explosion that Western civilization did. You notice that America is importing a lot of people from Latin America as labor, and the same thing with Europe. They're importing Asians and Islamic people into Europe to work because they are falling below replacement. Okay, our last slide is the development sequence, and here you see the 7 different important traits of a Western civilization and their development, and the order of which they attain these different traits. As you can see, these are in order and organic. And Quigley says when you receive or adopt these traits out of order, since they're not organic, and since one doesn't naturally follow the other, you're going to get a different result, and sometimes they're going to be troublesome. You can see how Western Europe had its ideology first, It's security or revolutions and weapons second, which you had security. You had the agricultural revolution, where they can actually grow food for a large number of people that gathered that released labor, that went into the industrial revolution. Once you had all these people together, you had to keep them healthy. So when you had a revolution in sanitation and medicine, and then when the ability to take care of a bunch of people, you got demographic explosion. And then to link them all together, you had a revolution in transportation. Here you can see how it's out of order of which of the development in Western Europe, and it had different effects. And he said one effect of having these, Asia and in the Soviet Union receiving these traits out of order. The first thing is when they received weapons. Okay, they received the weapons technology before the Industrial Revolution and the Agricultural Revolution, which are here. So when they received weapons that late, the common man couldn't afford it as they could in here in Western Europe. So since he goes through the spiel of how the weapons were affordable and cheap, and they could be acquired as the common man could acquire it just as well as the government could. So the government could not oppress them; they couldn't force them to do anything. Whereas here, since it was in reverse, the common man couldn't afford the weapons, and the government could. So the government could oppress them, and you had so here you had an authoritarian government, and here you had a democratic government, just by the fact of how they received weapon technology and how the Industrial Revolution and the Agricultural Revolution happened. And he said there's another point, that the sequence of the agricultural, industrial, and transportation revolution made it possible for Europe to have a rising standard of living and very little rule oppression, since the agricultural revolution provided food and thus labor for the industrialism and for transport facilities. So, but Asia got these backwards. They got not backwards, but in different order. So the labor could be obtained from, because you could keep more people alive, because the sanitary medical revolution caused the demographic explosion, but the labor couldn't be fed, with excess food, because you didn't have it, because you got this before this and that. So the only way you could feed all the people that you got for the Industrial Revolution is from oppressing the peasants. So the only food you could get was go down and take it from the peasants and send it to the city, which caused a bunch of revolts, caused a bunch of dead peasants. If you look at the 5-year plan of Stalin, you can see the oppression that he had to do to force the people, or force the peasants to grow food for an industrial revolution that they couldn't afford. The second thing is that the revolution in transportation and communications. Okay, this doesn't come out of nowhere. Okay, you have to have steel. You have to iron and steel for railroads, and you got to have copper for copper wires, and you have to be able to. You have to have an industry to produce this. But since they got the Industrial Revolution before this came, the only way that other countries could acquire it is by either borrowing money or taking the money from the peasants. So while other parts of the world borrowed money and became indebted to Europe, the Russians and the Asians didn't like to be in debt. So guess where they got the